had not seen a family member go through, say, terminal cancer or something that's extremely permanently exhausting, right? And now he has, but that's funny though in this movie. I'm not saying it's like not. I'm not saying it's insensitive in a funny way, and I accept it. but at this end, like there are a lot of things. So okay, when there's a testimonial of the 1945 Miss Montrose. And she's explaining, and I don't remember the name of the food. It's not
lutefisk.
Lutefisk. Okay, and what is it now?
Lutefisk. It's salted.
Okay, and she explains lutefisk. Yeah. It's cod that's soaked in lye for a couple weeks. It's heavily salted, best with a lot of butter. And you're just like, this sounds awful. It sounds like you eat this to survive long ship rides from continent to continent in the 1800s. And the butter just makes you not notice any partially rancidified meat. She delivers this with a straight face. This former beauty queen who's now pushing 70, and it's so charming. And that's the kind of.
And she had to melt her statue.
Right, and that's right. Her tiara.
Yeah.
For her crown. Yeah. Right. For scrap metal for the war. That was lovely, by the way. They didn't even let me keep my crown. but 18-year-old Mark and John probably saw that scene and laughed because this lady's old now because we're 18, and it's like, I don't know what that food is. Sounds weird. Again, but we get it. Now we get all these things. Mm-hmm. This was written for 40-year-olds. How old was the writer at the time?
She was in her 30s. So yeah, this is definitely aimed for a 30-ish crowd.
She wrote that though for her and her friends from college.
The Generation Xer movie.
Right. It's smart. It's edgy. This is written as if it doesn't care who gets the humor, even though it's not highbrow. Mm-hmm. This is really good.
And 22 years later, there aren't really any think pieces out there going, this movie has aged terribly. They're like, this movie at 21, 22, what do we think about it? Has it aged fine? And everyone's like, yeah, it's funny. So it's interesting.
You know why?
Why?
Because this movie didn't feel like it was 22 years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
This movie, other than seeing a camcorder in John Doe's perverted hands, other than that, like this, and other than seeing someone, like talking about a VHS, but momentary things, this, you could have changed a few 2-second clips in this movie, so brief, and you would have believed this was current.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
This is very timeless. So I do a lot of field biology, and when I do, you go to deliberately remote places. You go to the Ozarks in Arkansas or the Ouachitas in southern Missouri. I'm not going near St. Louis. I'm not going near Fayetteville. I'm going at the Mexican border in Arizona. I'm going to the Guatemalan border in Mexico. So wherever I go, I'm going to deliberately remote places. And when you do that, time doesn't seem to matter as much. And it's not because anything is primitive, and it's not because people don't have DVD or Blu-ray players or 4K players. But there's just something about these communities that feel more genuine. They feel like they're not part of the homogenous East Coast big cityness, right?
Yeah.
Where it doesn't matter if you're from New York or Boston or Philadelphia. If you went to college and got a graduate degree, you probably don't have an accent. You just sound like some Northeasterner who talks fast, right? People from these small towns, they feel like they're from somewhere with character, right? Not in a funny way, but it's easy to capitalize on it. And so because of that, again, like if you've been to small towns, if you've gone to remote places, this just feels like it could be now. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty cool.
With toddlers and tiaras out and all those shows coming around. I mean, it feels like this is a world that still exists.
I mean, in the most farcical way, though, look at the sensationalization of Honey Boo Boo.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, and that was, what, I don't know, 5 or 8 years ago. I have no idea. I never watched it, but that's very much our time, and crap like that's going on. Or this feels like it's the Real Housewives of Mount Rose, Minnesota, except you're just seeing them in pageant week.
Oh man, I also love it too. So the ending, I like how just kind of bleak but funny the end. Yeah, she moves up, but she moves up because someone gets murdered. And actually, the original ending was too dark. In the original ending, Kirstie Alley hangs herself in prison, and you just see her feet dangling. That's all you see because she killed herself. And then the lutefisk librarian is the one who starts shooting from the roof.
Oh no, I wouldn't want to see her turn into a killer.
And then so eventually they reshot it and they put Kirstie Alley up there because, you know what's wild is when people saw that Kirstie Alley hung herself, that was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back in this movie. That was the thing that felt really mean. Like she gave up. Because a lot of characters in this movie don't really give up. They don't have that suicidal tendency. You have... Yeah, sure. You have Mary Johansson, the prior champion, but she still seemed very happy.
People die. She's getting her hair brushed right off of her head, and she could die any moment. Yeah. But it actually doesn't feel dark.
Yeah, everyone, their positive attitudes sort of shine through. A couple characters don't. But yeah, I guess when Kirstie Alley hangs herself, that's a completely different mindset. And so this movie still is quite mean, but it's very smart and likable in its meanness. But a hanging scene, that makes it more real, I think. And I understand why they reshot it, because you laugh when the reporter gets shot in her neck and Kirsten Dunst just pulls a straight up mercenary role and picks up the mic and starts talking.
But the camera never lingers really on the fact that someone was killed. Instead, it's like, look at what Amber Adkins is doing, and look at her shining, right? It's a background kill. It's a kill that it's almost like it doesn't count as a kill. There's no gravity to it whatsoever. Whereas what you're talking about with the Kirstie Alley scene, as you're just telling me about it, I feel that gravity. I don't want that character to die.
No, and it was kind of, and I'm glad they reshot it, and I think that's pretty cool. And here's another thing that I think is pretty interesting what the director said. He said, instead of succeeding at being offbeat, like a Napoleon Dynamite, the director said it failed at being mainstream. Which is that's a pretty good quote, where I think these offbeat movies like a Napoleon Dynamite, which is a completely different film from Drop Dead Gorgeous. Good dancing, though. And Running for President, which is like an election and a pageant. No, they're not even close. There's no llamas either. But it wasn't allowed to be the offbeat thing that became a cult hit, like a sleeper hit in theaters. Instead, they kind of released it as a mainstream movie that just didn't pick up. It's an interesting dynamic. Because think about this, John. This movie, I think, I can't get into critics' headspaces. I read the reviews, they were angry. But it seemed like everyone was just tired of these types of movies. Everyone seemed to have a bad week. If this released in limited release or went to a film festival and people watch it like, man, did you see that movie? It's pretty messed up.
This is a movie that would benefit so much from the internet era because of that.
Word of mouth. Like, man, I saw this movie at Sundance with Kirsten Dunst, and it's crazy. I think this is a movie that would have been bought for a decent amount, benefited from a grassroots campaign, go to, like, not colleges, but go to, like, cool towns. I don't know, like Seattle, or I don't know, like somewhere, not colleges, but like other places, and then build it word of mouth style. I think it would have made a heck of a lot more than the $10 million it did in the States. And I mean, this was $15 million, so it wasn't much. And so you know what's interesting too, John? They sold the international rights to this movie. So they had already made money on it. So then the studio kind of thought, well, if we already made money on this movie. So if we go spend a lot on marketing, we might lose that marketing money. So we're already in the green on this. So the director said that since they had already made so much on international sales, that they just said, we'll just do some marketing and throw it out. No one really cared about it.
They just shat the bed on,
exactly.
on promoting their movie.
Yeah, and because they were like, we made money already, so why should we market this movie a lot when we've already made money? Because then we'll just lose money if we market it by a lot. And I just wish this could have had a grassroots campaign. And this is a woulda, coulda, shoulda. But like you said, John, this is this is very early internet. I mean, Phantom Menace was breaking all of internet's, but it's still dial-up. So there weren't many movie chat rooms. Like, Ain't It Cool News wasn't huge yet. So I think this would have benefited from some really cool word of mouth. Like, remember how Clerks... Remember those movies in the 90s, John, where, like, Swingers, or a Rushmore, or I'm just spitballing movies, Virgin Suicides.
Also Brittany Murphy, wasn't it? Or no?
I don't know if she was in
Maybe
that.
Not.
I want to throw it. Brittany Murphy got Allison Janney the job on this because they did a play on Broadway, and she's like, if you don't get her in this movie, you guys are idiots. So I thought that was interesting.
Really?
Yeah. But remember when we were kids? Not kids. We didn't have the internet. I'm presuming you didn't have the... I didn't have the internet.
I didn't have the internet, until college.
Yeah. I was 18 when I got dial-up internet. I got my movie news from Premiere Magazine and movie trailers when I went to go watch movies.
Entertainment Weekly,
and the MTV Movie Awards. Because they used to hand out this award for, Best First Feature, and it was Guy Ritchie from Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good pick.
Doug Liman for Swingers. Wes Anderson for Rushmore. And so I would see these, and then I would go watch the movie, because I was like, oh man, they just won a big award on MTV. I'm going to go rent this movie, because that's where I was hearing about it. Drop Dead Gorgeous could have benefited from that, I think. That's just what I'm going around in circles, and we're looking back. I mean, hindsight's 2020, but it's just kind of weird. This is a cult movie, but it's a very funny movie, John.
So we talk about a lot of movies, right? Very, very different movies, right? We've talked about some mainstream horror movies, some weirder, big budget horror movies like A Cure for Wellness that a lot of people haven't heard of, even though it was this huge, epic thing, right? You've talked about weird movies, weird, grimy movies. We've talked about highbrow movies, classics, major theatrical releases. Here's the thing. This is the movie where I recommend, if you're listening to this podcast, just watch this movie. I think you'll probably like it. I don't need to say, oh yeah, I mean, if you're into these big budget, action movies, go see Mission Impossible Fallout. But if you're a 65-year-old grandmother, you might not care for Tom Cruise or action movies. I don't know. Whereas I think that this passes almost every test. Whoever you are, if you're listening to this, I think you're going to like this movie.
Yeah.
And I can't say that about a lot of movies that we've both loved, right? Mm-hmm. Think about that. This is one of those movies where whoever you are, I recommend this movie.
I can't recommend
unless you're 8 years old.
I wouldn't recommend Cure for Wellness to everybody, right? But I love
absolutely
it.
Not.
But I love
absolutely
it.
Not.
And we made the case for it because movies like that really aren't made anymore. And that was Gore Verbinski at his pomp, so he was able to churn that out. But this one, yeah, I mean, it's PG-13, so it's not going to super rub people the wrong way. It's not, you watch some of these R-rated cult classics, like a Donnie Darko, which is not a comedy, but hopefully you get what I'm saying, where you find these cult classics. Some of them have a pretty big edge to them. Like Dazed and Confused, that became a big cult classic, but I don't think a lot of people are going to love Dazed and Confused. This one, though, there's enough there on every level to laugh.
Well, and I'll even say, so there are a lot of boxes that you would check for categories that normally come with trigger warnings when people review movies. Even though this checks all those boxes, I don't feel like it goes hard enough to really piss many people off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Some people have no tolerance for making fun of the mentally handicapped or for making fun of religious people. But the angle that they apply to it, it's that the mentally handicapped person is mostly testing the patience of his, again, father or brother. Can't tell from the movie which
it's his
the
brother,
case is.
because he's like, mom, we don't have mom anymore. right? So
he said that, but sometimes like old school people will refer to